Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's wonderful to be here with all of you this evening, and it's particularly wonderful to join Mr. Maira again. I was just telling him that I think it was about 15 years ago that I had the privilege and the pleasure of being part of his last book launch. It was again something that I moderated with him, so I'm pleased that I'm still around to be able to do this again. As I told him, I said he's still asking the very deep philosophical questions of us, and I don't know whether we have the appropriate answers yet, but he hasn't given up, and I hope that our quest to find answers to those deep philosophical questions will continue. I have wonderful speakers here this evening, so without further ado, let's get right down to it. As part of the discourse and the discussion that the book raises are the important questions of how we should look at economic growth, whether GDP should be the barometer through which we measure success and we measure economic growth. Of course, questions of equity and equitable growth is something that Mr. Maira has focused on through all of his work and, of course, through his tenure in the Planning Commission as well. And I think even in this book, he asks of us crucial questions about the role of institutions and the need for institutional reforms, both, as he said, institutions that deal with capitalism, but also institutions that deal with democracy, the role of industrial policy in a Trumpian era, and what the Trumpian era could mean for the future of the world as we know it. And I think that's an important, in fact, there's a whole chapter dedicated to that in this book as well. The role of free markets, the limitations of free markets, especially in a world that is as chaotic as it is. And I think those are some of the crucial issues that he raises. But I'm going to just read two paragraphs from the book, because I think that gives you a sense of the complexity of the issues that Mr. Maira is hoping to address. If you haven't read the book, then I will give you an indication of where you can find these paragraphs. On page 207, he says, the redesign of economies, businesses, and our lives must begin with questions about purpose. What is the purpose of economic growth? What is the purpose of business and other institutions? And deeper questions. What is the purpose of our lives? And what needs and whose needs do institutions and each of us fulfill by our existence? And taking that forward on page 236, he says, public policies are being driven too much by economists, data analysts, and artificial intelligence. The time has come to put more philosophy, poetry, and natural wisdom into policies for our shaping of our collective future. I'm going to put that to the chief economic advisor on whether we need more poetry and more poets doing economic thinking for us, or should we leave it to the economists. But Mr. Maira, why don't you take us through why you felt the need to write this book, and what you believe should be the imperatives that we focus on. There's lots that you have articulated in that book in terms of decisions that policymakers, society, civil society, businesses must grapple with today. But if I were to ask you to distill for us the two or three things between government, the private sector, and civil society that you think we must reimagine today, what would those be?
Well, thank you, Shereen. Thank you so much. It's such a privilege and, of course, a great pleasure to be in a discussion with Shereen. As you could see, she's a very, very busy person. And we know that. We see her very busy. She's read the book inside out, as I can see. I am, therefore, nervous. But I'm not nervous because I can see the phrases she's picked up, the passages she's picked up, are the very ones that I would like us all to discuss a little further. And so thank you for inviting me to say why I wrote this book and broadly what this book is about. I have been feeling quite a lot, especially more particularly since I joined the Planning Commission in 2009 at the invitation of Dr. Manmohan Singh, that there's a need to rethink economics itself. In fact, he said so. I'm not an economist, by the way, so I keep being mistaken for one. I don't mind. Economists are, after all, the people who understand things very comprehensively, and we rely on them. So please rely on me. I've done my thinking too. And what he said, Dr. Manmohan Singh, was that while we have learned how to grow the economy, and he was, remember, the person who liberalized our economy to enable businesses to have greater freedom and more entrepreneurship and open the markets to trade. And of course, now we are here with Trump telling us what we should do with respect to our trade. So we've come to this place with insufficient ideas of how to cope with a world that has been created by a certain way of thinking about economics, which, as I said, got into high gear in 1991, for which he said he is given credit, but he himself was questioning it by 2009, that economic growth wasn't including all the people of this country equitably. So why is it so? And he asked me, and he said, you know, you're not an economist, and neither are you actually a business person, really, not a great entrepreneur like Sunil, but you're a systems thinker. And so I want to use the lens of systems thinking. An economy is a very complex adaptive system, self-adaptive system. A nation consists of three, broadly speaking, complex adaptive systems. There is the economy, of course, and our economists tell us how to grow our economy. But the economy sits within a very complex adaptive natural environmental system also. And also, the economy sits within a very complex adaptive social system. According to the view of an economist, the economy feeds off those other two systems. It takes resources from the environment to feed its own growth, and it takes resources from society in the form of the labor and intelligence of human beings, who are the basic constituents of a society, to feed its own growth. So, looking at systems, the health of complex systems, all subsystems in a large complex system must remain healthy for the system to be healthy, like in our body. Our cardiovascular system, very complex. Our digestive system, very complex. Our brain system, very complex. All of them must be healthy. It's no good if two of them are in perfect shape and the other is faltering. The body is not healthy. So, to measure the health of our country, our nation, by the growth of the economy, without recognizing, paying attention to what's happening to the environment from whom energy is being depleted for the economy, as well as what's happening to society from which human energy is being depleted, used for the sake of society. We need a way of measuring systems health. And I can talk then why not GDP, but let me put it back to you.
Okay, let me get you to respond to why not GDP before I get the CA to respond to that.
Yes. Now, first thing, GDP is one indicator. We make it like the gross and supreme indicator, and we don't need any other, it would seem, at least at the same level as GDP. Never try to, we've both been in the auto business, try to run a car with only one gauge, which is the speedometer, how fast the car is going. Because the engine of the car is using fuel, and you better keep your eye on the fuel gauge also, otherwise you run out of fuel and your growth is going to stall. Also, there's an RPM meter which tells you if the engine is overheating and slow down. And analogously, I say the RPM meter is measuring the political heat and the social tensions. And if your economic growth is creating more of those, it's going to stall. And similarly, if your fuel is running out, environmental resources, energy is running out, you're going to stall. You must have three gauges. One gauge, GDP, by itself is not good enough. Secondly, the problem with GDP is it's measuring economic growth. So you take the inputs, if you talk about it as an indicator of the health of the other two, you take the inputs, the condition of the other two also in economic terms, in money terms. Now, how to convert the value of a forest into an economic terms, the monetary value of a forest? Well, an economist or a business person will say, what's the useful parts of the forest? The timber producing trees, that is the value of the forest. Everything else is junk and a nuisance and to be cleared out so that we access the trees more easily. Similarly, in society, from an economics perspective, it's the human labor and intelligence that is of use for the economy. The rest of the human being is really a nuisance and best not dealt with. So in this way, one indicator is not good enough, and especially I'm saying if it's only measuring the economic aspects of the system, And trying to convert the other two into money terms, we have a common metric, a common currency for measuring them, there's a problem. And this leads, Shereen, to the last point I want to make now, is that in converting the value of the other resources, that human resources as well as forest resources, into money terms, the price has to be fixed. And who has the power to control the price in money terms? Obviously the person who has greater control of the money. And this has become the dilemma, that people who control the money, whether rich nations or richer entities, they are able to determine the price or control the price by withholding payments when they don't want to. And they can hold money, it is storable. And human beings can't store their labor. If you don't pay them adequately and pay them on the day they finish their labor, that's it. That day of their life is gone. Similarly, a farmer's produce, you better pay for it a good price when it's still healthy and not wait for it to rot and make the farmer desperate to sell at whatever price. Enough philosophy?
Okay, let's get down to the economists then, and the real economist on the panel. See, you know, I think, again, this is not a new discussion, it's not a new debate. Should GDP be the only indicator of success as far as economic growth is concerned? But to Mr. Maira's point, does it often end up masking some of the crucial challenges and the complexities that require us to confront and address? And what is the fairer way, the more efficient way forward?
Thank you, Shereen, and thanks to Mr. Maira and Speaking Hard to have me here. There is one thing that is common between him and me, okay? Both of us are not economists. I actually did my BCom, went to IIM Ahmedabad, and then went and did my PhD in the School of Management and Finance. So in that sense, that's the only thing that is common between him. Other than that, I'm a novice, he's a veteran. And he has had an enviable career. He's intellectually active and still productive at this age, 80 plus. I'll be happy with myself if I'm half as productive as he is at this age. And if I look at the number of books that is listed in the inside cover of this book, 11, and this is 12th one, and still going strong. I think hats off to Mr. Maira for being so intellectually productive, concerned, caring, and sensitive. And this is amazing. So on the question of GDP, let me start with the story that I normally narrate to my students. There is a sports car being driven by a financial institution, derivatives trader. Smoking is weed, and talking on the mobile phone with this divorce lawyer. He's speeding and he hits it's a school bus. Nobody dies, but children have to be taken to hospital. The bus has to be obviously repaired. Every single activity mentioned in this episode contributes to GDP. But is that what we want, the kind of growth? So the lawyer's fee, the car insurance, the data that he's consuming by talking on the phone, everything adds to GDP. But therefore, the question is always, from what is GDP to what is GDP for, is always an important question. And I think that's the question he is posing. And I think it's an important question. That question always needs to be front and center of our policy making. Therefore, again, I thank him for putting that question front and center. He talks about cooperative human endeavor. I agree. But human beings are complex. They thrive both on competition and cooperation. Both are two sides of the same coin. And as he put it, there are three gauges. All three gauges matter. Similarly, competition and cooperation both matter. In fact, one could even go to the extent of saying that the disappearance of competition in 1989 with the disintegration of Soviet Union, etc., is what brought the United States to the current situation where it is today. So there has to be always a check and balance, which went missing from 1990 onwards in some sense. And so In other words, we have to have GDP, but always make sure that we don't stop with growth, which is the point he is making, but ask the question, is it making a difference to people's lives? And there I would like to point out that asymmetry is not a bane, but a feature of public policy. In other words, if you say money doesn't bring happiness, most of us would nod our heads. But the next sentence is important. But the absence of money will definitely bring unhappiness. Similarly, you might say, tax incentives may not lead to higher investment. Sure, but higher taxes will definitely drive down investment. Incentives may not bring in foreign capital, but if you end up punishing them, it will definitely go away. So everything that you take in public policy, it is featured by asymmetry. It is not linear, it is not proportional on both sides. That is what makes it tricky. So you might say, GDP alone doesn't matter. Growth is not enough for making people wealthier, but absence of growth will definitely make them poorer. So in that sense, you can't distribute nothing. And where we are at about $2,700 per capita and lower middle income status, growth is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. On that point, I'm very much in agreement with Mr. Maira. But more importantly, his book is not only for public policy. His book, tracing the arc through his private career, actually has message both for the private sector and the public sector. And you drew upon page 207 and 236. I will go back to his conversation with Mr. Suman Mulgokar, and he refers to the lecture Mr. Mulgokar gave when he was awarded the prestigious Jahangir Gandhi Medal for Industrial Peace. And there he talks about the importance of bringing out the best. And of course, Mr. Maira clearly makes the point, Mr. Mulgokar is using the language of only referring to men and not women. But definitely Mr. Mulgokar had enough respect for women. He makes a point to, he makes it a point to mention that. But the important thing that Mr. Mulgokar mentions is merit in that speech. And then the next episode, which Mr. Maira points out, is the interaction he has had with Mr. Palkiwala, when there was a extra dividend being declared, and then he also manages to convince him to give a one-off payment to workers. And then I turn to another page talking about the Gandhian economics, where he basically was averse to both extremes, Marxian communism and the unbridled capitalism of the West. It is about human-centric growth. In fact, economic growth has to be not about pro-business but pro-markets. And pro-markets comes very close to the conception of what he talks about in the book. It's not about being pro-business but pro-markets. So I think there isn't much to disagree with what Mr. Maira has written. At this stage, we have to create the wealth to be able to distribute. And definitely, if you read one of the, and he's not here, Mr. Sudipto Mandal, I went back when I was, trying to prepare for today's evening. I went back and read this piece Mr. Sudipto Mandal wrote. He has a monthly column in Mint, and he wrote this in November 2022, where he visits a village in Jharkhand 30 years after he visited it in 1980s and 1990s, and he goes back. And he talks about how the village has become well connected by physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, learning is happening, and there is no thatched roof house. Every house is concrete, paved with concrete, and has a proper roof, etc. So growth has brought about this transformation. So you need it to raise the resources. But you need to definitely make sure that for a country of 1.45 billion people, it cannot run on the economic vitality and dynamics of about 100 to 200 million people. It is not possible. So that is where I think we need to understand that growth is a precondition, but we shouldn't stop with growth. And if anything, the policies that governments over the years have adopted have focused on financial inclusion, and the formalization that GST has brought about has brought SMEs into the mainstream, given them access to finance. And if anything, I go back to Mr. Mulgaokar's point, the kind of fiscal transfers that we are seeing from states, etc., or political parties promising them before elections, we are actually moving too much into welfare payments or distribution without creating the assets that need to be there to distribute. And that is where his emphasis on merit and performance come into picture. So we have to have a distributional state, but in return, there has to be a distribution of merit as well, or performance. Without that, we cannot get to where we want to get to, both in terms of growth and development. Back to you.
Thank you, CA. Before I get Mr. Munjal in, I think this is an important point that the CA raised here on, are we moving too far down the welfare?
My mic off.
Sorry. Before I get Mr. Munjal in, just a quick comment from you, Mr. Maira, on what we heard there from the CEA. Are we moving too far down welfareism without creating enough resources before we start to distribute them out? And what are the challenges and the perils that we must make sure that we contend with as we go down this path?
This is the key of it. That first grow the pie, then you can distribute the pie. This is the problem of the economic model, where first the GDP and then the welfare can be taken care of. In the last century, and he's an economist, economics, and I've not been an economist and therefore had the opportunity to be dispassionately studying the history of economics. Economics is a very new subject, a new science. It was created as a separate science only 100 years ago. The first course in economics, Marshall's, was just maybe 100 years ago. What has happened within economics since that time? It has been through its all trying to discover. Let's talk of some of the conflicts. Keynesian economics, you may say, is oriented towards the welfare of people. Then you come to the Milton Friedman market capitalist economics for the welfare of capital and businesses. And somehow it will trickle down into the hands of the people. We have, linked with that, government or no government. Government is bad. Keep government out of things, leave it to the private sector. And this debate has been there before, and this debate is in America coming back. We better either have government or not have government. Quite confused. So this second thing, and socialism, capitalism, these big words and ideologies in all of that. But I say that another big thing that has happened in the field of economics was created by 6 economists, all from South Asia. This is development economics, and this started in the 1960s, 70s actually, when they said the way the developed countries, calling themselves developed countries, the rich, also colonial power countries, think about an economy and how an economy should be constructed, is different than the way we should think about our development. Our development has to create incomes and growth for people while the economy is growing. In their perspective, the point of pointing out is first grow the pie, then we'll give aid and charity or handouts to poorer countries and to poorer people. So the dilemma for economists, the development economics were struggling with this, but how do you create more incomes and employment actually as a means for the GDP growth, not first to somehow get through investments and stuff, GDP growth, and then the matter of redistribution. Redistribution is bad. Again, you'll be giving money to people, they don't deserve it, there's no merit. They haven't earned it, they haven't done anything productive to contribute to the growth. So the model of an economy as a growing system in which the growth of human capabilities, Amartya Sen's phrase, and I'm saying the growth of incomes at the bottom, you may say that's very communist, but that does enable the whole to grow, and I'm saying in a socially sustainable way. And so development economics, Manmohan Singh, Jagdish Bhagwati, perhaps on one side more about trade and liberalization, certainly Jagdish Bhagwati, of course, and Amartya Sen, Bhan from Bangladesh on the other side, as well as we had Jayawardene, I mean this and that side, and Mabul ul Haq, who of course was very free market and pro-market, and then human development indicators and so on. So there's been, within the development economists themselves, this dilemma. growth first or welfare and capabilities and education and health, the common goods that common people need first? And of course, the argument is, like we had in the debates when I was in the Planning Commission, Jagdish Bhagwati and Panagraya were talking about the Gujarat model and free markets and more trade, and that Manmohan Singh had given up on the liberalization, the Congress UP was too weak. There's still further reforms to be done. The word reform is interesting, and so do the labor unions want reform, so do environmentalists want reform, but in the economist view of the 1990s onwards, reform means only get rid of regulations. That is reform. If you haven't got rid of all regulations, there's still yet reform to be done. Where on the other side says the system has to be regulated. We need good regulations, which are going to mind, like I said, the health of the environment and the health of human beings too. That is good regulation. We need better regulations, not no regulations. So a market in which you leave everything free for those who have the power to control the market and determine the price, that market needs to be regulated. So regulating the market itself, which is the economic market, the financial market, is very necessary. In 2008, when we had the financial crisis, it was deregulation of the financial markets had gone too far. And who suffered? Not the big chaps up there, but everybody else suffered. What did the economists say after 2008? Oh, after this crisis is over, we'll discover a new normal, a new economy. Did they? No. They went on the same hyper, driving the same old model further so that more resources can be accumulated. Hopefully then it will trickle down. Came the pandemic. This time very clearly everyone said, we can't carry on this way. Humanity is going to die. The planet is going to die. We need a new normal, new model. What happened after the pandemic? The same model is on hyper. The inequalities have been increasing faster after the pandemic and through the pandemic, increased faster after the financial crisis than before. So it is to rethink, if I might say, the concept of a market and power in markets. The word that I find missing in all policy making is, where does the power lie? Who is shaping the rules of the game? And that's to my chapter on Trump. The Americans, yes, they decided that the world should be run as a free market. Okay, when they got rid of the Soviet Union, at least that opposition was away. Now, after 1991, it's all going to be a free market. Okay, finance can flow across the world. Finance, of course, all controlled in Wall Street and the United States and the dollar there. And so they control the world and the trade in the world. Americans do. But who sets the rules of the game? We had a GATT and a WTO and things like that. The Americans control that. And now they're very upset, Trump. Now I use the American metaphor that, you go down into the playing field with your ball and ask the other people to come and play, and then you tell the rules of the game. No, you can only come this steps and I'm allowed to go 6 steps. And finally, even when people learn to play by those rules and start winning, then you take away the ball and say, I don't want to play the game. This is where we are with Trump. He's taken away the ball and said, I don't want to trade. Yeah.
Well, since we are talking about Trump, here's the passage that I think captures what's happening in a Trumpian world. On page 233, the facades of fair trade and global democracy have been shattered by Trump and his henchmen. Whenever the US finds it cannot win the game while playing by the rules, it uses its muscles to change them. When even the rules do not suit the US, it takes its ball and walks away from the game, as Trump is doing. Financial greed trumps human needs. Power rules, not justice. Mr. Munjal, to the point that was being made both by the CA as well as Mr. Maira, the message to the private sector, and what do you take away from this reimagination that is being asked of civil society, of the private sector, and of policymakers?
I was part of an interesting project at one time at INSEAD in France, and the question asked, there were about 25 countries represented. I was asked to represent India. The question asked was, is GDP, exactly the question you asked, Arun, is GDP the correct and fair measure of the progress of a nation? And the add-on to the question was, what about skills? What about education? What about health? What about people's happiness? And actually I introduced them to the concerned ministry and the minister in Bhutan. I'd just come back from Bhutan that week. So it evolved into a very interesting conversation saying this was never designed as a measure of a country's progress. It willy-nilly became one because you had no other alternative to check other things that are going on. And this was some senior folks sitting in that room from many, many different countries. But I want to switch to a completely different aspect of a conversation I had only 2 weeks ago with Vinod Khosla in California. This was a continuation of exact same conversation I had with him 6 years ago. When he said artificial intelligence is going to take over all the jobs that we do right now. And he said, there is no surgeon who can perform better than a robot that's well designed. There is no lawyer who can get case histories quicker and better than artificial intelligence. And he went on and on and on. So my question to him was, what about jobs? He said, what about them? I said, what will people do? He said, they don't need to work. Why do they need to work? It was a very interesting question, actually, and it made me sit up and think. He's saying, why are they spending so many hours a day, a week, a month, a year at work? Is it only to earn? There are governments, they should take the responsibility to ensure that all citizens have sufficient income to live a comfortable life. That's a job, that's a role, part of the well-defined role, actually. And, sorry? So we have to think about where we are right now and look at where we are. We have 800 million people being given food grain free of cost every month. And it's actually not a favor. These are people who actually need it at this moment. Now the question was, should it have been done 20 years ago or should it be done 20 years later? There is a reason why we've got to where we've got to. There is a reason why there is anger, desperation, frustration, and despondence actually in many parts of the world. We have followed this market economy model so well that actually it improved many economies. What it did do at the same time is increase the gap between the top and the bottom dramatically. And the world was getting away with that too until the advent of digital communication, social media, stuff that you do. So everybody knows, and you and I have had this conversation earlier, everybody knows the price of the watch you wear, the shoes that you wear, how many rooms you have in your home. It doesn't make people happy if you say, I've got 6 kids and I'm living in a 1-room home, and here's somebody else who's got, a 10-bedroom mansion. What have I done wrong? It's making people angry. And leaders, especially political leaders across the globe, are responding to this. We had 64 elections last year in democracies around the world. And all of you know what happened. The vast majority of the elections were won by individuals in parties from not just right, but extreme right. A few from the extreme left. There were only 1.5 elections, and I'm saying 1.5 because they couldn't form a government for 6+ months, which was won by a moderate. There is no role left for a centrist moderate leader because we've got squeezed on both ends right now. We have created these pools of ideas which now are unable to talk to each other because we've taken such different positions. The art of conversation is completely gone out of the window. The quality of conversation, the political dialogue has got so debased. It is personal, it is acrimonious, and it's actually unpleasant. So there is no real dialogue taking place. When we talk about what is Trump doing or what is so-and-so doing, I mean, some of the wars that we have, in some sense, actually, India played an interesting role. You could buy oil from Russia and have a conversation with Ukraine. You were friends with Israel, and by the way, also with Palestine. So in some sense, this policy that we had built of a neutral world allowed us to do some of these. But also, if you think back a little bit, I'm sorry I'm going beyond your question, because I think there's a larger context to cover to put a finger on why this is going on. What is actually going on? It's not just a simply an economic question alone. It is very much social. It is very much political. It is very much economics. It's all of them combined. And I do think to be charitable, you do need to be profitable. You can't be charitable with other people's money. So as a nation, if you want to give out money, of course you have to be making enough to be able to give it out. To be fair to India, what we have done over the last 50 years, we have grown every 5 years to 10 years. Over the last few decades, you upped the pace of growth. But it's just not enough. It's not just enough. It is also the model of growth that we have followed, I think, is partially flawed, because you do need to figure out, since you spoke about industry from my perspective, I think we need to figure out industry at the top end where we are globally competitive and we can become global leaders, and we must. But at this bottom end as well, there's a section of industry which is actually suffering. We need to figure out a way to support that. Those are sectors with large employment. At the same time, and I'm delighted with what's happening in the world of startups, because while there will be many failures, as the nature of the beast is, we as a society need to understand, accept, maybe even celebrate failure if we are to make a success of startups and actually create new jobs. Because please remember, large enterprise by itself does not create large jobs. Large enterprises ecosystem is the one which creates jobs, the small, mid-sized enterprises, and therefore we need to create many, many more small and new enterprises. So what India is doing on that front is almost magical. But we do need to, and I believe we can, up the game to try and address big issues like public health, like skilling, like education, to give people the ability and the tools to be able to create sustainable economic opportunities for themselves. I think that is where the challenge lies right now.
Do you want to come on that?
Well, just Sunil, you said, first you got to be profitable before you can be charitable. C.K. Prahlad, great friend, great management guru, a great friend of India, right? And he came and coached our Indian business leaders in the late 1990s and 2000s to stand up. India is an opportunity.
Bottom of the pyramid.
Yeah.
Bottom of the pyramid. And he and I discussed that his model was flawed. I said, when you talk about the profit at the bottom of the pyramid, you're talking about companies being innovative and designing their products so that poor people can afford to buy them. But whose money is being spent here is the poor people who are having to spend money, and with that money, whose profit is being increased? They are not making profit. It's not profit at the bottom of the pyramid, it's profit from the bottom of the pyramid for shareholders and corporations elsewhere. He and I were invited by IMA to host. At the time the CSR law had just been introduced, and there was a desire to propagate the 2% of net profit to be given as charity, as CSR, to host a big discussion with big donors from around the world and companies and also a lot of NGOs about CSR and what a beautiful idea it was. And I said, if I'm going to design and curate this, and with CK, I'm going to change it. I'm going to make the title a very catchy title to invite people. The death of CSR and the birth of business responsibility. They said, no, but we want to propagate CSR. I said, there's a difference here. The CSR is a company makes a lot of profit, and you're saying, but can you please give 2% of your profit? And you say the profit, let me say, you're a good profitable company, is 10% of your revenues. That 100% of your revenues, and you get your 0.2%, how did you make the 100%? How much of the environment did you damage? How poor were the wages that you paid or took people on contract and couldn't care for their social security? At the end of it, and so the example I would give is that, during the whole week, you harm everybody in society. At the end of the week, you take some chanda to the temple and say, God, please forgive me. Here's a little bit of gift. So this thing is not about charity. My point is, it's not about charity. It's their ability, the merit, it's their right, and we must engage them. India is a country the richest in human beings, call them resource if you will, or capital if you will. Unless we use more human beings as our assets in our businesses and in our economy, we cannot compete with the world. We can't compete with countries who have more oil. We can't compete with countries who have more capital, because they will use that to their designing of their business models and to their advantage. We have to engage more people. And to Khosla's point, this is the problem, that Vinod is, yes, and they in Silicon Valley invented this universal basic income idea, realizing that while they're producing all these products produced by artificial intelligence robots, someone has to buy them so that income can come to their enterprises and they can make profits. Where are the people going to get the income if they don't have the work? So said the government should give them basic income so that they will buy, so that our business can grow. And the point government says is, but where are we going to get the money to pay them? We'll have to tax you because you're the only people with the money. Tax us. We don't have an incentive to work and produce any further. You know, we really think the fundamentals, some of our words, charity, innovation, enterprise, we just use them blithely. And I'm glad you pointed out that we have to sit back and say, what do we really want and what do we really mean by all this?
Plenty to unpack there, but I want to address the issue that was raised both by Mr. Maira as well as Mr. Munjal on free markets and the unfettered idea of free markets, as well as whether we need limitations to free markets. Your work over the last few years has been focused on that. I mean, the economic survey is talking about the need for deregulation, higher deregulation. As a policymaker today, some of the dilemmas that we're talking about, how is that the lens that you've tried to address the issue of deregulation? What have been some of the critical issues that you've had to contend with while arriving at what kind of deregulation is necessary and, more importantly, relevant for India today?
Thank you, Shereen. I think Mr. Maira correctly alluded to the importance of business responsibility, because it cannot be an act of charity, but it's an act of responsibility. He's right. Because at the end of the day, it's all about having a long-term horizon. If you are not responsible business while being a profitable business, then your own profitability will get undermined in the medium term. So if you have a long enough horizon, the conflict disappears, right? So again, so in that sense, I very much agree with what he said. And he also made the point that economists want only deregulation, and that is what they consider as reforms. But he said we want better regulation and not no regulation. Again, it is an argument which a discussion rather, we can have. Because who gets hurt by regulation? It is not the big businesses. Big businesses will always find a way around regulation. They can even outsource the regulatory compliance work to a third-party agency which will take care of it. Regulation affects the importance of startups and entrepreneurs, which Mr. Munjal pointed out. The small and medium enterprises are the ones that are hurt by regulation. In that sense, deregulation is not a pro-large business exercise. It is a pro-small and medium and micro enterprise. I agree with him when he pointed out the deregulation of finance. That is a completely different ballgame. Deregulation of finance is a lot more riskier and a dangerous avenue to ride on than deregulation of non-financial sectors in the Indian context, because you want the small and medium and the micro enterprise to shed the fear of growth. And let's talk about labor regulations. We think labor regulation is a matter of trading off the interests of the employer and the employee. No, I would like to frame it differently. Labor regulation is a matter of balancing the rights of those who hold a job with the rights of those who would like to hold a job. If to the extent that regulations raise the cost of labor so much that employers either choose to opt for capital intensive mode of growth or hire contract workers or completely take the capital away and go elsewhere, we are not protecting the interest of labor. We are hurting the interest of labor. So in other words, I am with him when we talk of smart regulation. But And therefore, today, where we are starting from, unfortunately, we are starting from an extremely over-regulated space. Therefore, the word deregulation comes into place. If we are already in the middle path, then I would agree with him and say, yes, we need smart regulation. But some of these, therefore, some of these counter arguments that come is because of our starting point. Whereas what Mr. Maira has written about in the book is very much true in the context of where you had unbridled capitalism, than smart regulation, compassionate capitalism, or business responsibility are far more important and necessary. That is why I think this book has a lot of relevance. Unfortunately, where we are, despite 30 years of so-called liberalized economy, which we are not, I think we are still in a space where we do not ask the question whether our well-meaning regulations or policies are actually hurting the very people whom we intend to protect. And that is why I think we still have a long way to go, because in this debate, the starting point matters a lot. And India's starting point is not the same as the starting point of the United States. Last, I'll close here. That is why we emphasize deregulation, because it helps our micro, small, and medium enterprises to shed the fear of growth. Again, Mr. Maira also pointed out, profits at the cost of environment is definitely bad. But if you look at some of our environmental rules and regulations, 33% green cover inside the factories. Now, in G20 countries, per capita availability of land is the lowest in this country. You go to a Germany or Japan, inside the plant, they will utilize every single inch of square feet to build the plant. Now, you force them, a small factory owner, to dedicate 1/3 of it to the green cover inside the factory. You are raising his fixed cost of doing business. You are going to force him to go out of business, or her, and she will not be able to create jobs. So, is this regulation pro-worker, pro-labor, pro-welfare? None of it. It's counterproductive. You can say, yes, you must create green cover, but create green cover elsewhere. And since you have acquired land, which is already very costly in this country, and floor area ratio is too low, please optimally utilize the entire plant for production purposes. Create green cover somewhere. You have to, I will monitor you, I will audit you. So, profit at the cost of environment, definitely it is bad. But environment to the detriment of profit and profitable enterprise will make us both poorer and polluted. Both will continue. So I think it's all about making sure that public policy has two iron laws: the law of unintended consequences and the road to hell being paved with good intentions. We need to mind these two. And therefore have a smarter approach to economics. There I am very much in agreement with Mr. Maira.
You know, Shereen, it's a journey.
Yes.
There's a starting point, and everybody has a different starting point. And in our own history, if we say now onwards what the policy will be, our starting point is the here and now. What we did in 1991, to keep referring to that's what we did and we must do more of it, we are no longer there. And so what America is doing today, what China is doing today, that's a different context. We have to take up present reality. And to the point he made, the purpose of a regulation, like using the labor example, is the regulation should benefit those who don't have jobs. And then next, benefit those who have insecure jobs. Before we ask the business people, what regulations should there be for labor? Our process of making regulations is consulting only the big guys and economists. And that's what I find. When the policy making, you have the big guys say we consulted industry. And who in industry? Not the small enterprises and others. So this is what when Manmohan Singh said that, look, we had said, India, that planning would be by the people, for the people, and of the people. It is being done for the people, yes? Subsidies and growth and whatever, you want to give them their ideas. It's not being done by the people, just like democracy should be by the people governing themselves. And this is exactly right. So in the time that I took on the Planning Commission, there was a whole demand in the country. The business community said, abolish this Planning Commission. It just is people in their ivory towers making plans 5 years, and the same plan starting the same way with lack of resources in the first step, then sectoral chapters, and then big hopes of India is going to be something, and the same form goes, nothing is happening, abolish it. This is CII, met and advised the government, abolish the planning commission, create something called an implementation commission. The civil society organizations also were complaining, please abolish this planning commission because they don't listen to us anyway, these economists. Please ask us, and that is why planning by the people. So I realized that the main thing was the process of making policy wasn't including the people for whose sake the policy should be. And they know where the shoe pinches, and they got very practical suggestions. They're aware that resources are frugal, and they're great innovators. And they can tell you, if you just change this much, our lives would immediately improve. You don't need fancy other regulations and measurements after that. Listen to the people. They know the needs. They have the ideas. But our economists would say, well, they are not economists. This actually happened. When we got the civil society organizations to propose their reactions to the approach to the 12th plan, they came out with a very sensible paper. Some 1,000 organizations had assembled from different sectors, children's organizations, women's, environmental, and so on. And they said, I'm saying practical common sense, maybe philosophy, into what the nature of the plan should be, the whole plan should be. And they presented it to us, some members of the Planning Commission. And I'm sorry, but we are economists who said, this doesn't make sense. And they said, but we've been telling you all this time, your plans don't make sense to us. So are we going to have a dialogue where, please, let's use common language at least, common sense and common language in the dialogue. So the consultation of a variety of stakeholders, the necessary stakeholders I'm pointing out, not just those who presently have the power and are therefore invited into the discourse.
As you know, Arun, we actually tried this. We called 140 people, if that was the number, if I remember correctly, in Jaipur, and we called it the Jaipur Leadership Conclave. And these 140 people were a microcosm of the country. We had industry leaders, economists, armed forces, teachers, farmers, students. So literally all were represented, and everybody got an equal amount of time to talk and to have a say about what the country should be doing. It was actually very interesting, and we got outcomes. We created groups of people. Arun had actually facilitated that conversation, and we said, if you can remove the friction, this country has the potential to do 14% GDP growth in the current way you measure it, okay, while doing all the other good stuff. This is while providing skilling, jobs, education, healthcare. You can actually still get 14% growth, and that is our potential. But to the laws and rules, Arun, I think there is a little bit of heavy lifting required. Our bulk of our laws are laws which we have only tweaked since independence. These are laws designed by a leadership which is running a country which is primarily against them. So it's based on complete mistrust of the people. How can you actually have a law which says, I don't trust you, you are my citizen, I don't trust you? Even to write my own name, I used to have to get somebody else to verify I am who I say I am. So we have moved some distance, but we have a long way to go there. So I think there is a need for us to relook at some of these right from the very fundamental itself, to design a new set. That's why regulation, and both of you said this right, regulation is necessary, but I think some of it needs to be written de novo.
And since we are talking about reimagining policy for the future, let me, Mr. Munjal, start by asking you, and then I'll get Mr. Maira and the CA to comment on that. Industrial policy. And we've seen many shifts, and we're now in the process of putting a new way, a new shape to India's industrial policy. And we're seeing this play out around the world. What do you believe is a relevant industrial policy as we look at the idea of India 2047, Viksit Bharat, and so on and so forth?
So I think any industrial policy that you make, now let's say us as India, it has to be relevant for India. Therefore, based on our resources, our constraints, and our current situation, and our population. So when we want to grow trade across the globe, as we do, and Arun has referred to this in this book, our trade must not be trade only for the sake of trade. our trade should be such which also enhances. So let me roll back little bit. We've been talking of growing manufacturing for a while now. Yeah? And sadly, as a percentage, it has not moved to anywhere near the targets that we've announced, but it has grown. We must recognize it has grown. A lot of good stuff has happened. But every time you create one manufacturing job, you actually create between 4 to 6 manufacturing related services jobs, which actually get measured only as services jobs. They don't quite get measured as manufacturing jobs. So we are not actually doing that badly as we believe we are, but we are still not doing enough, because we still have a large section of our population is not able to get, as I said earlier, and it has to be sustainable economic opportunities which also create sufficient income, not just a job, but the income should be sufficient to live a minimum standard of living, which is comfortable, happy, healthy, where the entire family can be looked after, where the kids can be educated. And I think industrial policy should recognize, as I said, both the top of India, where we can become globally competitive. We are globally competitive in some areas. Push those, figure out where and at the bottom end, we need to figure out a way to support and help grow those sectors which can absorb large. It's well known. If you look at healthcare, if you look at housing construction, only housing construction, there are 154 industrial sectors directly connected to it. And our Reserve Bank of India does not even allow a bank to give money for buying real estate. It is not considered, much less infrastructure, it is not even considered an industry. So there is a need for us to sit back and relook a little bit at what industry means for us as a country. I mean, I can go into much more detail, but I don't think we have the time right now.
Yeah, let me get the CA to respond to that. Industrial policy that's relevant for India for the future. And, I think the point that Mr. Munjal made, and I know that you've been publicly sort of focused on that as well. It's not just a jobs problem that we have, but we also have an income issue and an income problem. How do we address both?
In this, I have to very much count myself in the camp of Mr. Maira here, and as you correctly pointed out, we have been writing about it in the last 2 economic surveys, that the wage growth has not kept up with the kind of profit growth that we have had post-COVID. And now with the AI also making its own impact on labor supply or employment, this issue will become salient even for businesses. As they say, if your cars are made by robots, but the robots won't buy your cars, right? So you have to have domestic demand, for which you have to pay the, not only fair wages, but basically living wages, which are able to make also people meet their aspirations as well. So in that sense, again, it is not antithetical to business interest. It's a question of defining your horizon more longer than what you are defining it to be. So that is one part. And that I think Indian industry can do a lot better, a lot more. Not only that, there are many other areas. Again, Mr. Maira is absolutely right. It's not social responsibility, in my opinion, should not be an adjunct or an add-on. It has to be a part of the way the business is run. You look at the sale of ultra-processed food, or you look at the amount of screen time and smartphone usage, or ultra-processed food consumption. You put all these three together, we may be striking at the very root of our demographic potential. And so businesses have to balance, because ultimately these people will have to grow into their own consumers down the road. So these aspects are important. They are part of domestic corporate policy rather than industrial policy or business policy. That is why I said the book is important not just for policy makers but also for businesses. On industrial policy per se, I would say in the next 25 years, it is not a luxury, it is a necessity, because geopolitics is going to be the dominant theme of the next 2 decades. The question is not whether we should do industrial policy, but how we do it. The important thing is, again, just as I said in the case of welfare payments without performance or merit or accountability, the same thing applies to corporates. I remember Dr. Y.B. Reddy used to tell me, when we give a tax benefit to industry, we call it an incentive. When we do the same thing to the poor people, we call it a subsidy. Dr. Reddy used to point that out. It's wrong. I completely agree with them. So similarly, if you are going to give industrial policy and offer protection to domestic industry in the face of fair or unfair competition from outside, you have to demand performance, productivity, and employment generation. And there has to be a sunset clause for this protection. Otherwise, there is no point. So that goes back to Mr. Mulgaonkar's point in the page 60s of the book, which is about you have to create output, you have to have merit, you have to therefore conduct industrial policy in a manner that we become not only strategically resilient, but also strategically an indispensable nation. That is important. Thank you.
But just a quick follow-up. Can you do anything? Should the government do anything more than nudge industry to improve on wages?
See, this is where I come back to the asymmetry of what I said, the public policy. Sometimes the problem is for every problem there is a public policy intervention that has to solve it is a wrong thinking. You have to ask the question, will public policy improve the situation or will it make it worse? And then decide whether public policy should intervene or not, or should it remain with moral suasion, or what kind of incentive. So it cannot be the case that for everything there is a public policy answer to it, which in some cases yes, in some cases not. And therefore the answer depends on, are we going to achieve the intended consequence or the unintended consequence? Instead of improving the wages, if private sector decides to take the capital and relocate to a place where there is a tax arbitrage or a labor arbitrage, then I would have worsened the situation for my own workers and employees. So what am I achieving in the end? That is the question I need to ask myself, and therefore the design of public policy intervention has to be well thought through, recognizing the asymmetry.
Thank you. Industrial policy and relating it to our strategic autonomy and our own strength. I'm glad you said, and I'm so happy that, as you said, the question today is not whether industrial policy, but how industrial policy. When I joined the Planning Commission in 2009, Dr. Manmohan Singh said, look, my experience is all industry, and I've advised CEOs of companies abroad and here how to grow competitive industries. We definitely need to grow our industries, but like we said, they better employ more people in their growth and not demand more capital and more machines and to achieve manufacturing sector growth or GDP growth. So we need a policy to grow industry with the objective of increasing the incomes of the people, more people at the bottom. Okay, so this is it. But it was called industrial policy because my portfolio in the Planning Commission, the usual one, is you're looking after industry and urbanization and tourism and subjects have definition. I get a chief economic advisor of this country who just retired come and see me and say, do you realize which world you live in? We are not supposed to have industrial policy. The idea of industrial policy went out of economics in 1991, the Washington Consensus. So I don't care what you call it employment policy, incomes policy, but you're going to have to grow industry to do that. And of course, the process of growing it is very important, and Pradeep was part of it.
Just make all of the
Well, we got
required.
all the sectors, and we got in every sector, whether it's chemical sector, manufacturing in automobiles, and all the sectors, small industries in that sector, the big ones, labor, everybody say, what should be the strategy of growing your sector, in which small and workers will have benefits as we grow. So in that process, this is how industrial policy, I'm saying, was being made. But let's see, when I joined 1991, yes, we had, as in 2009, if you remember, Mani, you of course were around at the time, there was Minister Trade and Industry, and he had two departments, Secretary Industry, Industrial Development, and Secretary Commerce. By the time I joined 2009, the Secretary Industrial Development said, I have no work, because there's not supposed to be an industrial policy. The Commerce Secretary was highfalutin, had to be, because he was in all the trade negotiations. He was the important man, the Commerce Secretary. So this was the power shifted, right, to commerce and trade. So those who were good traders and could talk about trade regulations, they had a power in shaping the national policies. And the people who were required to build industry were saying, we don't require industry in the first place, so we don't require you. So in this thing, I just asked myself and asked the World Bank that, look, I want to compare. India has lost the industrial race. We were equal to China in the 1980s and late 1980s. Our capital goods producing sector and manufacturing sectors were higher quality. Your companies, my companies. We were exporting also to 58, 60 countries, my company. At that time, in competition with the best, we had good manufacturing and capital goods production, electronic hardware, small amounts, but equal to the Chinese. What has happened since then? That since 1991 till today, one is, let's talk about the per capita incomes in China, which matters more than the GDP, have increased 8 times faster than India. Yes, India's per capita incomes have increased, but they've grown 8 times faster. So what is the process they use? What are their philosophies and policies? That is what we should learn. So I told the World Bank that, look, I am a consultant to learning organizations. It was my sort of my practice. I think if I think of a country as a learning system, can you compare pairs of countries who at a certain context were similar and today their outcomes are very different? Okay, they smiled promptly and said, well, you're an Indian asking. Obviously, you must compare India and China. Similar size populations in 1980s, similar poverties, similar economic size also. And well, China's outcomes are dramatically different in per capita incomes, industry, and its participation in, let me say, control of trade, international trade, very different to ours. So I said, good. Now don't tell me about the policies China made regarding trade and so on, right? Openness, protection and stuff. How did China learn? What are the learning processes? They came back and clearly said, the difference between China and India is India policymakers are very poor learners compared to China's. And it's China and the policymakers learn along with the system. So the people are improving their capabilities, learning new capabilities. The enterprises have got new capabilities, and the nation has got new capabilities. The process of industrialization is a process of learning. Learning to do things that you never knew how to do before. That's Suman Mulgaonkar's message clearly. We in India don't know yet how to produce very complicated machines and trucks and design them and produce them, but हम सीखेंगे, करेंगे, दुनिया को दिखाएंगे कि हम भी कर सकते हैं. We had no foreign exchange allowed, hardly any technology allowed. It was learning, much faster learning than any other organization in the world at that time in our industry. So it came to China and India, and this was the point the World Bank made, that I think you Indians better focus much more on how you learn as a society, how you shape your own philosophies, your policies as a society together. And the Chinese, because it's a single party communist system all the way up, they've showed us the processes by which they listen to the people, the participation of the people in local rules and policies, the local entrepreneurs, the local people, the local citizens, very much. That party is very sure that if there's a revolution at the bottom, they'll get thrown out. That's how they came. They are much more concerned about the stability and the growth of the lives and incomes of the people, stability of lives and incomes of the people at the bottom, then our dynasts and our politics will be. If you're wanting to win the next election, they have got a very long-term thing. I better not be thrown out by a revolution in the next 20 years. Okay? So with that long-term objective, how do I reshape my system from the condition it was in the 1980s, the Chinese, and we ourselves? We lost it. We not just forgot that we needed to build our own industries. We just forgot that the whole process of development is a process of people learning together to do something that require all of them to cooperate together. Yes, there must be competition inside. In the details, yes. But in the whole mission, there has to be a cooperation. And this is what we need to rebuild in our country, the desire to be one country where everybody, small and big, counts as one. Purna Swaraj, equal opportunity for people in economic opportunities, political opportunities, and social opportunities, and dialogue. Unless we listen to the voices, especially of the poor, so-called uneducated people, they frankly are, to my mind, better educated, though they may not have PhDs, about the realities of the world. unless we learn to listen to poorer people, the less well-off people, ask them what should be the shape of the next steps of the journey. I'm sorry, we're going to keep remaining behind. Vietnam is now getting up, and we can keep talking. We've got this great future because we were like that 2,000 years ago. We are not learning as fast as the others are learning and doing.
Let's end then by asking what we should do as next steps to become much more of a learning nation to take forward what Mr. Maira left us with. Mr. Munjal, let me start by asking you as we talk about this process of reimagining India's economy, the next steps that you think are imperative.
I think one of the things we need to do is stop teaching our children to cram answers. We have to teach them to learn to ask the right questions and figure out their own truth. Each one of us has a different truth. At this moment, we are trying to create photocopies of each other every single time. And somebody who does not write an answer which is exact replica of what is in the textbook, they actually get marked down. So you're not encouraging learning. And the second thing I already said at the beginning, we have to encourage experimentation, and we have to accept that not everything will work. You will have failures, you will have things blow up in your face. So what we do in our company is, when we have these town halls, we call up people, we recognize people who've done something special, and at the same time, we call up people who tried but failed, and they get the exact same recognition. Because it's for trying, it's not for the result, because when you start, you have no idea what the result is going to be.
Okay, so experiment and create a culture that also encourages effort without emphasizing the setback or the failure. See the imperatives over the next 20 years that we need.
I think between the public and the private sector, there has to be an optimal balance between equity, efficiency, and effectiveness.
Mr. Maira, I'm going to give you the final word before we close this evening, sir.
I'm learning that when we got to a moment where people are beginning to say, I think we need to rethink, and we need to rethink together, I shouldn't be giving the last word. It cannot be the last word. The last words are going to emerge, but this conversation, I hope, will continue. And you will take it to your different forums and say, like your question, what do we need to learn to do? And how will we learn to do it so we can create this India that we aspire for?
Well, lady, okay, I'll take
Shereen,
two.
we'll take
A few questions? Okay, sure, sure, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I've got a mic here.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Raghav. It's a very insightful conversation. A few loose ends, not questions, I'll just go straight. One was AI. Whatever Mr. Khosla says is irrespective. We are going to lose jobs. 90% of the jobs are not going to be there in 10 years. It was a smartphones in 10 years created a revolution. It will be a bigger revolution than this, whether we like it or not. Humanoids are coming. Quick, sorry. Second was, have we come out with an economic philosophy of India? At the end of the day, we are argumentative Indians. There was a lot of discussion, but we don't have a consensus. Whether we like entrepreneurs or we hate entrepreneurs, we don't know. Third is, sir mentioned about, we are looking at reimagine economy in, that's a question. Are we looking at it in silos because we didn't discuss about judicial reforms, legislative reforms, executive reforms? These are the things which run the economy.
Thank you. If you can just keep your questions brief so that we can address more of them. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Maira spoke about the fact that what are we measuring? Mr. Nageswaran, from the village rural ecosystem where I work, the soil, none of the farmers are, using and consuming what they're growing. That 50% of the houses are locked. And what we measured, as you said, were the roads, connectivity, and the pakka houses. To the point that the soil and the nature aspect is being lost. The manpower isn't there for the rural community. So why aren't we measuring that?
Let's address three of
I don't think we are not measuring that. That is why the innovations about soil cards, and now you have the critical agricultural mission for 100 districts, etc. So I think it's not entirely true that this is an either-or situation. We are measuring, we are aware of the fact that agricultural productivity itself has a room to catch up with the global average, and that we need to do a lot better in terms of irrigation and what economic surplus that farmers are left with, which is why the 50% cost plus 50% formula is there. If anything, if we look at the way Indian farmers are prospering in non-traditional crops, there are lessons there to farmers and to the public policy ecosystem in the traditional crop area. I will leave it there.
You're absolutely right. Many jobs will get lost to AI, but at the same time, I believe AI will create many, many more new opportunities and new jobs. The challenge is going to be that the timing. We will first start losing jobs before you start creating new ones. So we have to figure out a way how to close that gap and how to do reskilling and retraining very, very quickly.
My question is really addressed to the panel, but specifically to Arun. Manu Joseph has just come out with a book which has the title, Why Don't the Poor Kill Us? My question to you is, if inequality really matters so much to ordinary people, why don't the poor kill us?
Money, I think that is the way an economist would ask the question, that people are feeling, well, they know because social media that there's economic inequality. So why don't they grab, and this is a very revolutionary idea, kill us and chop off the heads of the king and the queen and take it from us. But people don't just want economic prosperity. They do want dignity, respect, family, many things in life. And so if they are feeling that, many other things they're getting presently in this country, and which are giving them security and some comfort. Yes, we would like also on the economy side for us to be better off, but the rest of it is, I don't want to lose it. I don't want to risk it by going out on that. So it comes to the point that was being made that it's a law, it's a system, and human beings have variety of needs. I said need for dignity, need for justice, on all spheres, social, political, economic too. And so which aspect of the injustice is bothering them more at this moment will then determine what they're going to rebel against firstly, and whether there'll be a rebellion at all. So we must sit back and look at as a nation as a system of human beings, and human beings are not rational, self-interested persons concerned only about their identity.
Yes,
Things matter to them, other things.
I'll come back to you in a second.
No, my question is not answered, Mr. Nair.
Yes, his question was about skilling.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Manufacturing. Did we consciously
Of
ignore
course, you see,
manufacturing?
let's not put labels into what is manufacturing and what is service and what is agriculture. Taking something out of the ground, which is work, but it's taken out of the ground, and then you produce some stuff that you put on the side of the farm, some crop, and you say that's agriculture because you're working on the land. But that thing that you take out is going to be processed even on the farm today. You'll dehusk it perhaps, which is a manufacturing process. You're applying some effort to change the form of that material, and you do other things on the farm. I say that's manufacturing, isn't it? Okay. And so you go to service. On the farm also, a person will be some fellow taking a wheelchair and, a wheelbarrow and a bullock cart and taking things around, which is a service, but we describe it as part of agriculture and farm, right? So these definitions of what is service and what is manufacturing and what is agriculture, let's forget it. We want work that is going to add value and work for which people are adequately compensated in money terms. So what is work and what is the future of work? To artificial intelligence, people are pointing out one very important point. At any technological change, there's a time of transition, and people can keep saying, ultimately it worked out well. But so many people lost their jobs, so many communities got displaced, the transitions have big costs. And politicians and we all live in the transitions. We don't suddenly jump into the future. We live in the transition. So managing the transitions, which is a political process, is we must pay more attention to it. Where the have-nots, or people who fear they will have not, will demand more voice into that. But to skipping manufacturing to services, just recently, a former chief economic advisor of the country and Reserve Bank governor co-wrote a book repeating what has been said for a long time, that after we got our Infosys and others in the late 1990s, and they became very high-tech and respected around the world in exports, well, India's not missed, India skipped the manufacturing stage. We lost it to China, but so what? We can go into services. But what services? Those high-end services, Sunil, as you know, require very high-end education. The sort of people who should be in manufacturing enterprises are sitting in air-conditioned offices and writing code. And they are contributing to, well, the wealth and profit of some, excuse me. And the other services which are growing, are people running on Blinkit and all these fellows. That is service economy. For us to say, I want someone who can give it to me in 10 minutes. This 15 minutes is not good enough. What is the value it's adding really to lives, and what jobs are being created? Service jobs. So rethink again. It's not a matter of services or manufacturing or agriculture. It's the work that is being created and the security, incomes, and the social security people get with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
There's a burning question.
Yes. We have exactly 2 minutes left. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Maria, one of your colleague, Mr. N.K. Saxena, used to talk of the way we have spent money on subsidies. If we would have given in cash, by this time we have removed the poverty. Do you think this is going to happen? And Ilya progeny, you have the imagination. And we have the third, fourth economy, and per capita is 139. Nowhere in the world is such a big gap. So what is the solution to resolve this problem?
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mr.
I've got a few reflections, Shereen. One is what are,
Questions, sir, please. We were
I-
completely out of time.
without reflections, questions won't come.
We're unfortunately completely out of time.
Then I'll pass.
So can I? So I have a specific question for Mr. Munjal, sir. There was some talk about jobs being lost to AI, but there's another crisis brewing, sir, which is the affordability crisis. Perhaps 99.9% of the urban dwellers have been priced out of the housing market, which is a fact if we talk about national capital region. So there was a phrase used, value created at the bottom of the pyramid. You were able to do it in the manufacturing world, where a product was created which the average urban rural Indian could happily buy, use, and feel proud. If you had to put your finger on top 3 changes that need to happen, very broad level, policy level, to actually bring this housing market back to a place where people actually right now have lost the hope of home ownership in their lifetime.
Real estate prices in India are completely unreal. Absolutely no sense. On a power purchase parity, we are about the highest in the world right now. And the price of land, and it's driven by policy actually. As I mentioned earlier, you cannot even fund land purchase. It's not permitted. And for the life of me, I cannot understand. It's the biggest, best, most required public good in the nation, and we don't allow it. So there are a whole host of regulations exactly in the same manner, which militate against bringing the price down. It's not as if the real estate companies have suddenly started making 50-60% margins. Barring 2 or 3 companies, everybody else sells at a margin which is normal for business. But the entire cost which is built into the system, our construction techniques is 2.5 generations behind. And we know the way construction takes place all over the world. That's part of the labor policy that you spoke about earlier. So it's not just the technology, it's the regulatory push which is actually driving us further and further and further down the same road.
We could spend the evening going over this issue because, as I pointed out, it requires a very nuanced conversation. But hopefully, we'll continue to have these conversations. But for this evening, we're going to have to draw things to a close. Renuka, may I invite you for the vote of thanks?
Thank you,
please?
Shereen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, on behalf of Speaking Tiger Books, I would just like to say a very heartfelt word of thanks, first of all, to our very distinguished panel, Dr. Anantha, Nageswaran, Mr. Sunil Munjal, and Shereen Bhan. We know how busy all of your schedules are, so we really appreciate your taking such a chunk of time out of it to engage in this very, very interesting discussion, which I'm sure has left all of us with a lot of food for thought. I'd like to thank Usha Munshi and her team at IIC for giving us this opportunity to hold the discussion at IIC. And of course, I would like to thank Arun Maira for giving us the privilege of publishing this book. If you all have found this discussion interesting, then I would just like to add that copies of the book available for sale outside. Do pick up a copy, and I'm sure Arun would be happy to sign it. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And just a small request at the end, could you please hold up the books and unveil them? Thank you.
I guess that would make sense. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you on the 7th.
You misunderstood my first comment. I was not saying anyhow. That's a separate conversation you and I.